guys, today I want to talk about weightlifting belts. All right, so we get questions from clients and sometimes patients too about maybe they're returning back to lifting from an injury, or they're really interested in barbell sports. They're like, should I use a belt? When should I use a belt? What type of belt should I use? So I wanted to just address that quickly in a video here. So weightlifting belts, essentially the concept behind them is a couple functions. I really like to use them as a cue for core bracing, meaning we put a belt around kind of your midsection here. That gives you a tactile cue of where you should be breathing, where you should be creating tension, and kind of how a properly braced core should feel, okay? So obviously you have to get a belt that fits you correctly, you have to put it in the right spot, and we have to breathe into the belt, okay? The goal is not to, I've had some people kind of like squeeze their abs in. A lot of people say like, bring your belly button to your spine. It's like doing that reduces intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, what we want to do is increase abdominal pressure. So we want to breathe out into the belt, okay, and push pressure into the belt to increase the abdominal pressure, which will stabilize the spine then, okay? So there's been a couple studies out that show wearing a weightlifting belt will increase your IAP or intra-abdominal pressure by about 10%, which is very significant when it comes to lifting heavier loads, okay? And anecdotally, I know like for me personally, if I'm training for max strength at my heavier sets, maybe 85% plus, for me, it was about, 80 to 85%, I would start maybe adding a belt on. You notice that weights feel a little bit lighter, you feel a little bit more stable in the core, and it kind of helps those heavier weights move a little bit faster. And if you look at, strength sports at the top level, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, strongman, those sports are, the best people that compete in those sports are typically wearing a belt for the heaviest sets. And there's a reason for that, because you're kind of gaining, a little bit of external stability, a good cue on where to, kind of brace into, and it does help lifting performance. The caveat there is, if I'm let's say I have a back injury and I want to return to lifting heavy weights, I want to come back and know that I'm bracing properly, loading, to the point where my body can handle it, and that I'm not creating more injury potential down the line. So what I would say is, when people are coming back to loading properly, and say they're not even up to 60-70% of their previous maxes, I would recommend not using one initially, okay, to get that core bracing sequence down properly, to feel stable yourself, and as you kind of add volume and intensity, then you can kind of think about putting a belt on from that point. Now, when it comes to athletes, again, I just had this conversation with a patient, but like the rationale behind lifting incredibly heavy for athletes, so like 1 to 2 rep maxes, is a little bit in question. Like, is it necessary? Maybe. I think definitely lifting high intensities is important. It's very important. The question is, what's the difference between a 1 rep max and a 3 rep max in terms of injury potential, in terms of, technique breakdown, things like that. That's kind of up for debate. Probably a good topic for another video, actually. But when it comes to lifting belts, I think those top sets that you are lifting, the 85% plus, again, I'm coming up with that based off previous literature that I've seen. About 85% plus is where about most people will add a belt and see an improvement in their lifts. I think that's a pretty good rule. So a lot of your higher volume sets, your hypertrophy type sets, your 10s, your 12s, you probably don't need them as much. And for certain lifts, I'm thinking of front squat, for example, because there's a little bit of limitation in terms of like where the bar is placed or just the apparatus you're kind of using, wearing a belt can sometimes, hinder progress on longer sets like that. But typically for strength, specifically, that 1 to 3 to 5 rep range, you're going to get a good boost in strength from it. You might squeak out an extra rep or two. You might stay a little bit more stable, but just know that, that belt is helping you. But in my experience and in my opinion, that's a really good thing to have there, and it's allowed in competitions. It's not like you're getting an unfair advantage, anything like that. So yeah, if it allows you to lift heavier in a more stable way, that's a great thing. Just know too that, if your core is not your weak point or your weakest chain in the link, then you may not get as much of a benefit from a belt. So say you have, really weak quads, I should say, and a really strong core, your quads may give out before your core does. Now, typically, like for most people, their core will kind of give out first, okay? And that's when the belt helps the most, all right? But, keep that in mind when you're lifting. On those top sets, that's kind of when you should be using them. If your core is your weak spot, or you're relearning to brace, it can serve as a really good tactile cue, but you don't want to get to the point where you're reliant on them every single time or every single set, and especially with some of those higher rep sets where you're building a lot of fatigue and your heart rate's elevating, it could kind of, create a little bit of a hindrance in those instances. So, all in all, in summary, wear a belt for those top sets. Don't worry about them too much for your build-up sets, and don't become reliant on it. But it's definitely a great performance boost, and the best people in strength sports are wearing them, so don't feel like you're cheating yourself. Okay, we'll see you in the next one, guys.